moving on to section 2, the tools that we have at our disposal, right? So this is good for basically both musicians and sound engineers. We need to know everything that we have in order to generate a good sound, in order to generate balance, right? So first and foremost, our ears. This is something all of us have, or at least I suspect that all of us have, okay? But this is our most important tool, right? It's what allows us to calculate and allows us to, make good and rational decisions. So the reason I bring up our ears first and foremost is because it's really easy nowadays, especially with all the technology we have in front of us, to mix with our eyes, right? We're naturally visual creatures. In fact, I've said multiple times to probably a bunch of you guys, right? People like to hear with their eyes, and it just doesn't actually work that way. If you take the board and put it down and you just sit and close your eyes and listen, you'll have a much better grasp of what's actually happening and what's actually going on here in a mix. So use your ears, all right, to create a good sound, and don't let visuals get in the way of what you think should be done, right? The actual musicians and their instruments. So I bring this up, this kind of seems like it should be like a duh type of thing, but it's actually really important knowing that obviously we're on the same team here, okay? And so it's good for us to be able to communicate back and forth. So you could break this down and say, okay, from the musician's perspective, it's the quality of the instruments they play, but it's also what they choose to play, right? And I think sometimes as sound engineers, we're reluctant to say something if we hear something that seems off to us. But, musicians, sound engineers communicate with each other. Musicians don't, you hear things differently on the stage than what you do out front. You don't really get that out-of-body experience, and sound engineers do. And so talk to each other, communicate. Musicians, ask your sound engineers, what does it sound like out there? Sound engineers, if you hear something that's off, talk to musicians. Say, hey, this didn't quite sound right to me. Is there something we can do to fix that? Gain staging. All right, so what is gain staging? It's actually a really, really crucial part of the mix, and it's something that gets overlooked constantly. So gain staging is just controlling the volume that comes into the soundboard. And it's important because it affects literally everything down the line. On the soundboard, there is a knob that says gain, okay? And if I turn that gain up, or mess with the input going into the soundboard, it not only affects the sound that goes to the front of house, but it also affects all of the monitor mixes that are coming in. It affects everything in the live stream. And if something doesn't get set right at the beginning, then having to fix it later causes mistakes everywhere down the line, right? So sound engineers, set your gain stage right. Musicians, make sure that you're setting out the proper volume. If the sound that's coming in is too hot, then you start to get distortion and clipping, which is not good. It doesn't sound great, at least not in controlled environments. And if it's too low, then that leaves you room that you're going to potentially have to turn it up higher. So sound engineers really, really make sure that when the sound is coming in, especially if you're looking at the meters, right? Yes, I know I'm contradicting my first one. You can look at the meters. It's okay. They do have a purpose and a tool. Make sure that they're somewhere in the middle of the meter. They're not too high, not too low. Okay? Faders. So assuming we got gain staging right, faders is the next most important. It's basically just the overall volume of everything that's coming in and coming out, right? Making sure that whatever the lead vocalist or whoever the lead vocalist is sits out on top. If somebody has a lead part, make sure that you pull them up, right? Little subtle things. Anybody who's ever watched me mix live here or watched me mix in the live stream will know that I am constantly micromanaging faders, right? When the actual service or the actual performance has started, I'm not messing with EQ or any other tools all that much. I'm mostly just moving faders up and down and really keeping track of who should be on top and who do I want to stand out the most, right? So faders, a really, really important piece of the equation. EQ. So this is what we'll get into in a little bit. EQ, for those of you who don't know, is short for equalization, right? And EQ is just the management of those frequencies that we were talking about at the beginning of the in the first section of this presentation, right? So obviously, like I had mentioned earlier, making sure that everybody fits well within that balance of that 20 hertz to that 20,000 hertz, right? Making sure that everybody has their own spot and that nobody's climbing over the top of anybody else in the mix here. Compression. Okay, so this is a really, really difficult topic because compression is an amazingly good tool. And I'm going to steal the Uncle Ben line here. With great power comes great responsibility. You can do amazing things with a mix with compression, and you can also completely destroy a mix with compression. If you don't know what compression is, I'll give you a brief rundown, but I'm going to highly caution anybody who doesn't know what they're doing with it. It is basically limiting how loud somebody can be, right? So what you would do is you would effectively put a ceiling on the top of how loud somebody has the ability to be, and you can control the slope or how quickly it engages or how quickly it releases. You can do really cool things like you can control the timbre of instruments with compression. Instead of having to use EQ, you can make a kick drum less boomy. You can control pops and S's out of a vocalist's EQ. But you can also totally squash somebody in a mix if you don't know what you're doing with it. And so if you're not sure what it is and you're not sure how to handle it, it's completely okay to stay away from compression. I'm hoping to have a really detailed section on this sometime in the future, but that's going to be the quickest, easiest rundown that I give of what compression is in the meantime. Reverb and delay. So we've definitely been utilizing this more in the last couple months than we have previously. Some of, when you're in the front of house, some of the reverb is provided because you're actually in the room with the musicians, right? We're in a big gymnasium. There's lots of hard surfaces, so things reflect and bounce quite a bit. So some reverb is provided. I think we probably add in a live environment more delay than we add anything else, right? But there's certainly times where there's a nice big ballad and you want to make sure that, you know, whoever is out front just has this nice ethereal voice that fills out the entire room. So it's really, really cool in that environment. But I'd say probably more importantly where reverb is really, really utilized is in the live stream, okay? You're, as a broadcast engineer and working on live stream, it's a completely different medium, right? You're trying to create an illusion, basically, that the people who are listening are in the room with you. And so controlling ambience really, really, really is important. So anyways, reverb, delay, probably the last of our tools here in this section that are really important for us to use. Other things that can affect our sound, speakers, right? The quality of the speakers, the actual device that's the sound is being produced from, whether you're listening through your iPhone or a set of earbuds, or obviously coming up through these main speakers, right? What speakers you're listening through is really, really important. If you're in the front of house, obviously you only have one place that you have to listen from, and fortunately we have some very, very nice speakers. We've been blessed with a speaker upgrade over in the last year, okay? As the broadcast guys, you're mixing through your headphones when you're in the back room listening, but you also have to remember that as the live stream guys, you're not mixing for the headphones that you have on. You're actually mixing for every set of speakers simultaneously, which is a much different goal and a much different way that you have to mix. So the speakers that you have, obviously, these are other tools that you have, but just keeping in mind like where the sound source is coming from, you have to mix for that too. The room that you're in obviously makes a big difference, whether you're over at the main church or whether you're in the gymnasium here, right? Each of those kind of has their own quirks, and some of those are great. Some of those are things that you have to work around, and that's okay, but all of those things affect the sound that you're going to hear. How big your audience is. How big your audience is, anybody who's ever mixed here at the Bridge knows that as soon as the room fills in with 250 to 300 people, chances are your mix is going to change and you're going to have to make some last-second adjustments after the fact, right? People who are walking, people that are walking around are basically, you know, they're gigantic absorption panels is what they are. And as they walk in, if there's only a lot of hard surfaces, guess what? Those people are going to absorb a lot of the natural ambience and reverb that we talked about here in these rooms, and it's going to It's going to affect the way that you hear everything. So that's another one. And then finally, where you stand, okay? If you're mixing here at the bridge, it's a lot easier to just mix from the center, but that doesn't mean that that's the only place that people are hearing stuff from. It's fine if you want to dial things in from one position, and it's fine if you want to try and get everybody balanced from one position, but don't be afraid to like walk around the room once, right? Don't just mix from your perspective, mix for everybody. Walk up to the front, walk to the sides, maybe where people are sitting with the side fills. You might hear things a little bit differently, okay? Same goes over at the main church too. Feel free to walk along the back line. Even feel free to, you know, if you're mixing from down on the floor, go listen up in the balcony. If there's people up in the balcony, you got to make sure that they can hear everything crystal clear too. So these are all the tools that we have. I guess things I would ask for each of my musicians, just whether you're the sound engineer or the musicians, get familiar with the tools that you have, right? Understand what's at your disposal. You have a lot more in front of you than you think you do, and if you spend the time to really understand what's all in front of you, it might just give you some more creative ideas for the ways that you can manipulate and make your sound even better than it was before.